Hey, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. We're glad you're tuning into this episode. We are a viewer and listener supported podcast, so we really appreciate you listening, watching on YouTube. We really encourage you to subscribe to whatever platform you're using. If you're on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, or if you're on Apple or however you listen to a podcast, be sure and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. Also, make comments if you like it and share it if you like it. We really need people to make comments and share the episodes that you like. And then also, if you're not already a supporter, we really would encourage you to go to spiritualityadventures.com and you can pick a tier, and we have bonus content for every type of giver. This is a nonprofit, so they're tax-deductible donations, but we do provide bonus content for those who are supporters. So be a part of the team, help support Spirituality Adventures, and we're so glad you're tuning into this episode. All right, well, welcome everybody to Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I am so delighted to interview Dr. Bradley Jersak. And Bradley is a longtime pastor, theologian, author. Actually, now, are you still the dean of St. Stephen's?
I'm now the principal.
The principal of St.
Stephen's. It's like a president, but it's more the less executive, less CEO, more like the academic side and overseeing people and caring for them. So yeah.
St. Stephen's is like a seminary, right?
Kind of. It's a theological department of a university, whereas a seminary is usually more like on an ordination track with a particular denomination. We're not that. We're and we're a hybrid school, so that means we have people coming in for a week of grad studies in person, but then we do also Zoom and recordings, and so we have students all the way from Dallas to New Zealand to South Korea, Siberia, Germany, and Northern Ireland, and South America. South Africa. So we're dispersed, but then we gather for intensives that are really wonderful.
I've had friends study there with St. Stephen's through the years.
Oh, really?
Some, vineyard guys.
Yeah. It used to be a lot of vineyard folks would go there, but then when we became more overtly affirming, then the students would go back home and they were pretty enthusiastic, and then that didn't go over well. So we've lost some trust there with even though we're trying to be bridge builders between the right and left and the progressive and conservatives. I think we do a good job of it. It just we also have a good relationship with individual vineyard folks that from our history as you have too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Bradley, thanks so much for being on here. Brian Zahn several years ago said, you gotta get to know Bradley, and I was like, okay. And so I've been kind of following you ever since. So thanks for doing this.
I'm happy to be here.
How many books have you written now?
I don't know, like maybe 22 or 23.
Wow.
Like some of them were, the range of genres is crazy, from children's to inspirational to theological to political philosophy. So the political philosophy ones have sold almost a dozen copies to date. And
you get a pretty narrow bandwidth of readers on some stuff. Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, if you can make students buy them as a textbook, you can at least sell some. But and the other stuff has been more popular, and especially I did this thing called a more Christlike trilogy. And
that's the first one I want to talk about with you. But first, let's get a little bit of your background. I always like to get a little bit, like where you born, where you grew up, what was your family faith tradition, and then we went through I've heard you use the word meltdown. So take us into your meltdown. Now, I had a meltdown of a different sort, but mine was just 6 years ago, and I'm still in recovery. Share, kind of give us your track, and then take us to the meltdown, and not the long version, but a shorter version, because I want to dive into some of your books.
Sure, sure.
Um,
Okay, so I grew up in a conservative Baptist home with, and the earliest years were extremely good, where my mom taught me the name of Jesus and I fell in love with him. My dad taught me to love the scriptures, and I still do. They were really into sharing their faith, and I still do. I don't do it the same way as they would have, but that impulse that Jesus is worth talking about, it matters to me a lot, and that's never left me. I've retained that. But then, the revivalists came to town in the 70s, and that was the Armageddon, Left Behind, turn or burn kind of ultimatum stuff, and that really tainted some stuff for me. I ended up going to a conservative Bible college as well, but by the time, and that's where I met my wife, but by the time I graduated from my undergrad, her church, which was Mennonite, invited me to come on staff as a pastor. And so I did that at youth, young adults, and outreach for 10 years there, and really, really enjoyed this Anabaptist vision of a Jesus-centered gospel that takes the Sermon on the Mount seriously, that it's meant to be lived. And I love that. After
well,
10 years
I
there,
got to give a big amen right there on
yeah,
that.
amen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So anyway,
yeah. So I'm still part of me is very Anabaptist in that sense.
yeah.
And they used to call it Christian. So those who live the Sermon on the Mount as their way of being, and they convinced me that that's true. And then that was 88 to 97, 98 to 2008. My wife and I planted a church called Freshman Christian Fellowship with another couple, Brian and Sue West, and our focus there was people with disabilities. One third of the church were people with disabilities in full-time care,
Hmm.
plus their care workers. That group ended up attracting addicts because the addicts are like, oh, I'm not the messiest person in the room. I'm safe here. I
Yeah.
belong. And so we had a lot of people, both clients and staff of recovery houses and that sort of scene. And then we had a lot of because that they were noisy. Then parents who had kids who couldn't manage in a normal Sunday school, they came, and so we had a lot of kids running around too, who, dancing and waving flags and doing their thing. And then also just the nature of who we are. There was a good number of people from uh, the with poverty challenges.
Mm.
So I did that for 10 years. I was co-leading it,
Where
and
was that located?
in Abbotsford, BC. I still live in this town,
Okay.
in that town. And so that leads me to the 2008 meltdown.
Yeah.
So what happened that year? A lot of stuff happened that year with regard to ministry and life. One of the things was just we faced an intense series of tragedies, and I did a lot of work in inner healing, and this went beyond what could be healed that way, or at least what I could manage. And that, like, we had over the next year, we had a lot of, church of, just maybe 120, 150. We had a whack of people die of cancer, die of overdoses, a terrible abduction, a terrible, gruesome murder. And these things, I'm just trying to manage people's joy, sorrow, and choices. That's called Messiah complex. And so, and one of the alcoholics, she's one of these gruff old sponsors that are just amazing. She's like, dude, you are in a meltdown. What did she say? You're unraveling and you need to get in a program. I'm like, for what? And she said, well, to begin with, management addiction. But but that was having other impacts too. So I also suffer from what we call a love addiction, and that is it's where there's a bottomless pit for affection, and you're craving it, and in the craving of affection, you cross boundaries with dear friends and blow up the friendship. And um, I'm grateful that I'm still married. Um, it was hell for my wife, but so I got into 12-step recovery at that point, and I love it. I've been part of recovery groups I was working with addicts before that since '89, but now I was attending as someone who
Yeah.
needs recovery.
Yeah, we
And
have one of the largest Celebrate recoveries in Kansas City.
okay.
Never dreamed that I would. Now I've been in an AA 12 step for
Yeah.
coming up on 6 years now of
Yeah.
celebrating
Well, it's
my sobriety.
pretty amazing
Yeah.
actually
Yeah,
to see how God works in those places with
for sure. Sure.
restoration, you know.
Yep. Yep.
And then I should just say in terms of church background, what
Oop.
so when I did my meltdown, then I got out of pastoring. So that was 20 years of pastoring, and I'm like, I can't be responsible for that. And so I went off and did a PhD in political theology.
Wow.
And
At,
meanwhile,
at Where did you do that at?
Bangor is in Wales, but I did most of it online because I
Okay.
also they subcontracted my own mentor in British Columbia to as a co-supervisor who I could meet every 3 weeks. And
Hmm.
so it was a good arrangement. It's sort of like
Political. Say it again. What was
political theology.
what was your dissertation title?
So it was the well, the dissertation title became a book
Oh, okay.
titled From the Cave to the Cross, the Platonic Theology of George P. Grant and Simone Weil. And so, it was 100 pages of political philosophy, and then 100 pages of cross-shaped theology,
Hmm.
and then 100 pages of putting this into practice in the world.
Interesting.
And yeah, and so I should say Simone Weil, Weil, she became a real catalyst for my healing because she faced the problem of evil and affliction very seriously. And it was kind of her works that got me through it. And in fact, I translated some of her stuff from French to English. And
Wow.
yeah. Meanwhile, I during that time I participated in the Eastern Orthodox tradition as well, and so one of the people that are involved in my healing was an old monk, Archbishop Lazar Pahalo,
Hmm.
who he's been a good friend for 23 years, kind of a spiritual father, and my nervous system was so broken. Um, Partly because of the double binds I got myself into as a in meltdown, and partly because of the overstimulation of the renewal movement. I needed something quiet and orderly for my nervous system, so liturgical life became quite therapeutic for somebody when you have a damaged nervous system. and
Interesting.
and so yeah. um,
Hey, I'm
um,
curious. One of my cousins, I'm Fred Heron, Britt Heron, grew up Southern Baptist like I did, but then he
yeah.
married a the daughter of a Greek Orthodox
Yeah.
priest, and so anyway, his son, is grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church. Samuel Heron, who went and trained with one of the top Greek cantors in Greece,
Hmm.
and who now travels, and he has his own YouTube channel and does the canting, and in the Greek. Anyway, and he travels the world doing this.
Oh,
He's
wild.
like a
Yeah.
professional cantor almost, or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, I was what was called a tonsured reader. So a reader does the chanting the
Chant.
scriptures, chanting the
Yeah.
Psalms, all of that
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff. They would, yeah. And yeah, and what I loved about that tradition is just at least there's a stream of it that I follow, where there is no retribution in the nature of God
Ooh.
because God is love.
Yeah.
And this then frees you to think outside of retributive um, um, atonement theories. It frees you to embrace, as a conviction, ultimate redemption for all. There, not all Orthodox would go with that, but you're allowed to,
Right.
And so the God who's not ready to punish, but whose judgments are all restorative. It's very then works really well with people in addictions recovery, where it's
Yeah.
about restoration and transformation. and coming home to the Father's love, and
Yes.
so that appealed to me. And I will say that I am appalled by the Christian nationalism that both in Russia and America, and well,
And
we're
Hungary
susceptible.
and
You
Brazil,
agree?
and you can keep going,
Yeah,
going. Yeah.
yeah. And that's an Achilles heel in the Orthodox Church. And also I'm an egalitarian, so I have a issue with not just male-only priesthood, but I see a growing misogyny that's really popular right now that's maybe causing the Orthodox Church to grow, and I don't want anything to do with that aspect of it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so wow. So I love the title, and I haven't read even close to all your books, but I dug into A More Christ-like God
mhm.
and then also Out of the Embers. So I'd like to kind of
Okay.
focus on those two. But I know you did a trilogy, A More Christ-like God, More Christ-like Word, More Christ-like
Way.
Way.
Yeah.
I only read More Christ-like God, A More Beautiful Gospel.
Hmm.
And you know, um, I so I've through all my stuff that I've gone through these last several years, I always lean toward grace and love. I was never sure about hell, but if there was one, I didn't want anybody to go there, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but in recent years, I've really, really, really just done a deep dive into, open relational process theology, and it's caused me to rethink some of the bad ideas about God.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, when you wrote A More Christ-like God, I think it published in 2015. So this was like
10
six
years
or
ago.
7 years after the
Hmm.
meltdown in 2008.
Yeah.
Did that meltdown, um, was that all inside you before 2015, before the meltdown, or did that really cause you to rethink your theology and then come out with this more Christ-like God?
Yeah. No, gratefully, a lot of what was in there, I developed prior to my meltdown, and it's in essence what got me through it.
Okay.
So some of the contributors to my belief in that God is completely Christ-like and that he's into restoration rather than retribution, and that his mercy endures forever. All of this kind of thing. The, I think the recipe would include my experience in the inner healing movement, both as someone doing the praying, not only for extremely afflicted individuals in terms of abuse they'd been through, but also through doing inner healing work with perpetrators of abuse, and seeing how consistently Jesus was in his approach to them, what they would hear, how they would hear it, and how he would restore and transform them. So that was my direct experience of a more Christ-like God.
Okay.
And then from the theological side, that was increasingly through the Orthodox theology of God is love plus nothing, and that there is no retribution in his nature, and that any kind of literalizing of the anger or wrath of God um, is regarded by the early church mothers and fathers as idolatrous and blasphemous.
Mm,
So I mean, they're really hard on that. So I had this, I had that experience, and then also then my experience of the ministry of the people we were working with, because it was very mutual. So how the disabled people and how the addicts would minister to me and how I'd meet Christ in them. And there was just this utter consistency around the love of God. And
mm,
then I could begin to read my own, let's say, the toxic images of God that I held,
mhm.
either as punitive or the one who abandons us, or the one you can manipulate and bargain with. All of those I recognized in them. Those were projections of mine that I was putting onto God, and there's a lot of ways of seeing God, and so. you could argue everyone just has a projection, but so choose your poison. But I came to see that the Jesus Christ is the image of the invisible God. And so that's what we know about God. He's what God has to say about himself.
Mm.
Um, you could have toxic Jesuses too, I suppose, but I think the experience of Jesus, where you can measure the credibility of that image by the transformation that you see in those who engage him directly. That's what won my heart. So then, by the time I had my meltdown, I also had enough of a net to get me through the suicidal ideations and to get me to a kind of repentance that came from kindness rather than threats, you know. So, yeah.
So beautiful. Um, since you wrote A More Christ-like God,
Hmm.
has anything, would you change anything in that?
In that book, no.
Yeah, in that book. I was just curious. Yeah.
Well, maybe there's things I could have added to it, but I didn't need to because I could write more books.
Right.
So,
Right.
what did I need to do? Well, a more Christ-like God made me realize I needed to think not just about what God is like, but about anthropology. What are people? Who
Mm,
are we, and how are we meant to live? So Jesus shows us what God is like, but he also shows us what it is to be truly human.
mm.
And that's what a more Christ-like way was about. And then what happened there was once I'd written those two, people are like, well, wait, what about this verse? What about that? And you had a million what about questions, or God is love, but. And so I realized we those who are reading the Bible that way need a new way to read the Bible. They need an ancient way to read it. And the other side of it was those who are like, I don't want to read the Bible anymore. It's just a bad book. And I'm like, no, you just need to learn how to read it. So a more Christ-like word was, in light of our experience of a Christ-like God who shows us what it is to be divine and to be human. Um, we have tools from the early church that teach us how to read the Bible through that lens.
Mm.
The whole every part of the Bible is a prefigures the person of Jesus and his gospel. And that, so I dug deeply into how the early church read the Bible. And
Pre-Augustine even,
oh yeah.
for
Well,
sure.
and
Right.
I would say how Jesus read the Bible. Like,
Yeah.
oh, Jonah, that's about me.
Yeah.
The road to Emmaus, it's all about me. How John writes his gospel. It's like, oh, every feast, every item in the temple, it's all a trailer to Jesus. And then in the second century, you've got Irenaeus and Melito and some of these guys who explain how to do it. And I'm like, oh, they actually have textbooks on how to do this. Why didn't I learn that in seminary? So,
Yeah, I realize how steeped my education was through the lens of Luther's interpretation,
mhm.
versus, yeah, versus Jesus and some of the
Yeah,
early church
which is a
fathers.
little late, right? 1.5 millennium. That's pretty modern.
Yeah,
It's modernism really at the outset. So,
yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, it's so fascinating because I think, yeah, I love that trilogy that you did because with the evangelical construct in America right now, you Brian, in the forward to A More Christ-like God, he pointed out how you can find any kind of God you want in the Bible, right?
yeah, yeah.
You can find the mean, vindictive God. You can find this kind of God. In recent days, I've started just saying, like, hey, like in the Bible, you find all kinds of bad characters, and we certainly don't want to emulate all of the bad characters that are in the Bible.
No.
And in the same way, we find some bad ideas about God in the Bible too. I mean, and
Yeah.
the way Midrash, I think the ancient ways to read the Bible, pre-modernism, are
Hmm.
far more valuable, and they don't lock you into these rigid single dimension interpretations of
No, yeah.
texts.
What
You
we
know,
call the flat Bible. It's not a flat Bible.
yeah,
um, God's people are learning who God is, but they're not going to fully get it until Jesus shows up to with his revelation. And so, you know, so they're in process too.
Yeah. I used to, just say almost similar to what you just said is that, if you want to know what God looks like in flesh and blood, look at Jesus. If you want to know what humanity looks like in the image of God, look at Jesus, So
Yeah.
there's that confluence of the image of and likeness of God there that is demonstrated beautifully. So love has become my lens of interpretation, and I think that's what Jesus. I think Jesus was a progressive Torah teacher who had a lens of love through everything that he looked at. I don't know. Is that something you would?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even how he's reading his scriptures, he's like, okay, here, read the law, read the prophets. Now here, let me summarize. Love God and love your neighbor. And the rest is details or diversions
Mm-hmm.
or even cautionary tales. Um, but even his idea was I think I talk sometimes about the Old Testament creed because I run into progressives who slam the Old Testament God, and I'm like, I get that. I can find you lots of ugly scriptures that express something important about our bad ideas, but the bottom line is in all the major revelations from um, Abraham, Moses, David, and the prophets, I desire mercy, and the Lord is gracious, compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness. Um, that's your core, and so Jesus distills that to what he left with disciples like John. God is love, and anyone who loves knows God. And if you don't love and you claim to know God, you're lying. Like it's that. If there's something clear, it's that.
Yes. Yes, for sure. Well, let your book Out of the Embers came out just a few years ago, a couple, two or three, and
Sometime, yeah.
so, huh? Is it?
I don't know what it was. Yeah,
When did it come out?
2000. Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And the subtitle Faith After the Great Deconstruction.
Yeah.
And if we just look at, I don't know about Canada as much as I know about America in terms of church attendance and trends and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, really, America has seen a decrease in church attendance for 5 or 6 decades in a row now, right?
Yeah.
But it almost seems to be accelerating to some extent, to where, like in our big cities, coastal cities, our church attendance may be nearing what it is in Europe, right? Like 3, 4, 5%, something like that.
Yeah.
1, 2, 3,
Okay.
4, 5%. The Midwest still has a little bit of strength. The South still has a little bit of strength. I'm just talking about sheer church attendance.
Yeah.
But
Which is its own problem in some ways,
exactly,
of what
exactly,
it's become. Yeah.
exactly. But there is a definite mass exodus going on in America for sure. Maybe not in South America or Africa but Europe, the exodus happened way a long time ago, right?
Yeah. Hundreds of years. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
post-Christian largely. Yeah.
yeah.
At least in the Western Europe.
But America is now moving that direction at a fast speed, wouldn't you
Hmm.
say?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're kind of calling that the great deconstruction. It's almost like a new era in the church. And why
Yeah.
don't you
That's
give us
why I
your
called it that. Yeah.
why
I
don't you
was
give
thinking
us
the
your
Great Reformation. It's a
yeah,
hinge point, right? This is another hinge point.
yeah, give
And
us your perspective on that hinge point right now in at least in America, and maybe how you see that in Canada or other places as well. I don't know.
okay. Well, Canada's more in
European.
the European
Yeah.
post-Christian. It's so a saving grace of that is we don't have a strong Christian lobby. That's we're grateful for that actually, because the kind of temptations towards theocracy and all of that are we we would regard as imperial. Um, but yeah, my take on it is this, that it's layered. So one thing is that a deconstruction, literally, I mean, if we take it in the narrowest sense, is you're interrogating something. You're interrogating, usually originally with Jacques Derrida, the philosopher, he coins this, and he's like interrogating how your language imports it subtly imports power dynamics into it. And so I'm talking in a broader sense than that. Um, uh, David Hayward, he's a cartoonist, goes by the name Naked Pastor, but don't Google Naked Pastor. It's a bad idea. But you
Actually
can,
just interviewed him a month ago and
yeah,
released
he's
a
marvelous,
podcast
isn't
with
he?
him. Yeah, and I didn't
Yeah.
realize he was a former vineyard pastor.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I love how he puts it. He talks about deconstruction as just the permission to question, the permission to ask questions, and specifically questioning your faith.
Hmm.
Now, because of this, I see um, different layers to the deconstruction. So one is there's a kind of um, a deconstruction that happens from thinking through things afresh. So it can be a theological kind of deconstruction. What is God like? Who is God? And what do we make of the Bible? And then some folks who are asking those questions then um, they find they're actually drawing closer to God because they're getting rid of accretions, you know. And others, it's like they just completely leave the faith. Both are a kind of deconstruction from asking theological questions, but there's also the kind where it's more emotional. So my meltdown, I was deconstructing theologically in a very liberating way, where, oh, God is more loving than I ever knew. That's a deconstruction. Meanwhile, though, I'm melting down in at the level of my emotions and my nervous system and traumatic experience of like, can I trust God? So you've got voluntary and involuntary deconstruction. You've got liberating deconstruction and the floor falling out from beneath your feet, and that's quite a range, I think. And so I'm looking at all of that happening at once, and then and that includes then, am I part of a faith community? Um, uh, uh, have I lost my heart for that? If I leave, will I go into isolation and alienation? Or will I feel like I escaped from prison and I can finally fly? And then and so some of this does then affect our church attendance, but and then also within the churches, you've got those that are just exchanging something beautiful for something rather ugly in terms of a politicized faith. And then others where the churches are finally getting it and like, oh, you mean we can be affirming of the LGBTQ community? Oh, you mean we don't have to threaten people with an eternal conscious torment in a lake of fire? That's not our gospel. And so I just see all these dynamics swirling. And so what I did it in my book is I tried to just take one at a time and said, what if it's involuntary? What if it's voluntary? What if it's liberating? What if it's traumatizing? And then after all of that, is there some, what would faith look like? And I describe that as a living connection and and presence in communion. So about being present to each other, God being present to us, connection and belonging and the kind of stuff I experience every week in recovery as well. So this is I don't know where you want to start with that, but that's kind of an overview of the
Yeah.
range.
Yeah, well, I mean, just so you like, I literally felt like an atheist,
Hmm.
and I definitely had passive suicide ideation in my darkest
Hmm.
2019 and into 2020.
Hmm.
And I questioned everything I'd ever believed, and I'd believed hard, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a real believer, you know. And then I wasn't even sure I believed in God anymore, you know.
Hmm.
And but you know, I'd prayed my whole life and prayed all day my whole life pretty much, and it was just weird, you know. I felt completely lost and out of place, and I can still feel that way to this day sometimes. But
Hmm.
I'm pastoring again and all this stuff, so I found it fascinating. It was like reading out of the embers for me was almost like drinking from a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
you put so much out there, and gave so many different types of deconstruction, types of reconstruction. It was fascinating. I loved it. It's one of those books where I want to go back and read it again slowly,
Yeah.
versus getting ready for a podcast interview.
Yeah,
But
it's not that kind of book, is it?
no, no. And so, but I wanted to start. You told this old story about the seven sleepers.
Yeah.
Tell us that. Were- I had never heard that until I read it in your book, and then you pulled from that seven like people to look at that can give us clues about how to navigate through this great deconstruction from a lot of different angles,
Yeah.
from, I mean, you could be an atheist and agnostic, or different types of Christians, different types of even other faiths. I think that you brought to the table with all of these seven sleepers. So give us that little story, and then how you kind of unpacked that into helping people through the process of deconstruction.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I hadn't known of this story. You don't hear about it in the in the Western Protestant churches, but basically, the idea is at some point in early church history, there's this, well, let's call it a legend, um, but it's the story of seven guys down in Ephesus, and they're being persecuted. And they know the emperor is coming to town. And if they get arrested, they're probably going to be killed. So they go hide in a cave. Um, and to escape the martyrdom that will come because they refuse to worship the emperor. Well, in this cave, they fall asleep.
And this is like third century
It
story kind of thing.
depends when you
Yeah.
read it,
Okay. All
like
right.
there's
Yeah.
different versions, but yeah,
Okay.
thirdish. Well, when they go to sleep, it's before that
Okay.
because, um, yeah, it might have been third century. So because the persecutions really don't stop till the 320-ish.
Yeah.
So they go to sleep, but then like they stay asleep, and anywhere from, depends who you ask, from 140 to 300 years. It's like Rip Van Winkle.
Yeah.
And so one day they wake up, and they're like, wow, we're hungry. So they're in this sealed cave now, and they unseal it, and one of them sneaks down into Ephesus, but he's kind of alarmed because he's got some money, he's gonna buy some groceries, and he's seeing crosses on the gates. And that's weird. There weren't crosses here before. That was illegal. And then he goes to buy food, and they're like, this money's old, like hundreds of years old. So they recognize these are unusual people, and they through a series of events, they end up going back and recovering these seven sleepers, and who now get to see the world, the new world, through different eyes. And you can imagine them as a thought experiment, seeing things they're delighted by and in wonder of, and things that maybe they're horrified by and wonder about. And so, just a funny part of that story is that although we might regard it as a legend, that story, those seven sleepers, are both in the Catholic and the Orthodox Church calendar,
Mm.
that we venerate them, and which just means we honor them and their witness for Christ because they were faithful. But so when you've got like, I don't know, 1.2, 1.4 billion Catholics and another however many, 300 million Eastern Orthodox, and then on top of that, the story is in the Quran.
Isn't
So
that
they're
wild?
honored by the Muslims too. So you got another,
That's so
couple
bizarre.
billion people. Then how is it I never heard about it in all of my, I had 12 years of Christian education post high school. Never once heard of them. So then I started playing with this, and I thought, what if you had seven sleepers from history wake up today and they're looking at this deconstruction they're in. Um, who would I want to see wake up? Who would I want to address this? Who are some of the mothers and fathers that might be my seven sleepers? And so I thought across history, and I thought, you've got Moses, talk about deconstruction, melting the calf down, but also like sort of the people in who are always kind of wary of images of God. And then I thought about Plato, the Greek political philosopher 300 years before Christ, who prophesied the crucifixion of Jesus as a Greek philosopher. And then Voltaire, who was much later, he's like in the 1700s, and he was a scathing critic of Christianity. And he was able to not only deconstruct sort of the religious intolerance and of the Catholics in Europe and how they would torture people who didn't believe that. Voltaire really he sounds dangerous to some people, but I'm like he's going to be a hinge point for us in terms of understanding the importance of religious tolerance, and that he even deconstructs the deconstructors. And then you've got the guys from the 1800s that guys like Brian and Zond and I love Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, and even Nietzsche. And then in the 20th century, I'd mentioned Simone Weil before, this philosopher, activist, mystic. And so I make a case from each of them about some kind of way they have something important to tell us about testing our faith, questioning our faith, and as a result, not ditching our faith, but purifying it somehow um, of the muck and mire. We could say the tarnish, the way our faith gets tarnished. What do you do with that? And if Jesus is really into presenting a bride without spot or blemish or wrinkles, well, what are our spots, blemishes, and wrinkles? These guys could tell you, men and women. And it's not all just negative either. It's like some of them are saying, what's the pure thing what if deconstruction is a refiner's fire? What if there's gold in our faith and silver and precious stones? So that's what I do with the seven sleepers. They're just marvelous people, but that's the densest part of the book too. Like it's the middle section of the book. And some folks they may just want to skip that part, and that's okay. It's more heady, but it's also like I go deep into the problem of evil. I'm relentless about that because I think that's the Achilles heel in every religion, including Christianity. We don't know how to face that. But I'm telling you, Dostoevsky sure did, and Simone Weil sure did, and some of the others like them.
Yeah, so I've never read a single book by Simone Weil. I've seen her name many times. I've read quotes from her. So in reading your book, Out of the Embers, it obviously it made me want to read some of her, especially with the impact that she had on you when you were doing your PhD work. I love this quote that you have from her: "Faith is the experience of a heart illumined by love."
Yeah.
What was it about her? Because she was what, French philosopher from what the
early 20th century.
Early 20th century. Okay,
yeah,
so
she dies in like 1940.
I mean, she didn't live that long a life, right?
No,
Maybe 40 years or something, or
34 years. Yeah.
wow.
So yeah. So what got me into her is during my meltdown, I was really despairing. You've been there. And I can't live this way. Do I even want to live? And so Ron Dart, who become this mentor I mentioned, he was taking me into the hills for hikes, and then he ends up saying, "Look um, I think you need to read Simone Weil." So I pick her up, and she's saying, "This is what saved my life, really." In conjunction with the people in my life who were caring for me. She said, we need to stop trying to rationalize evil and suffering and affliction. And she uses affliction in a very specific way. Affliction to her meant non-redemptive suffering, where it's like the toddler who drowns in the grandparents' swimming pool. There's no lesson here for the, it's just you're devastated. Or the people I knew who were being murdered, or someone who's abducted and sexually abused, and then maybe they're killed, and this is affliction, and the 6 million Jews and in the concentration camps, all of that stuff. So she says, if you try to um, uh, what happens when we try to rationalize the problem of evil and affliction is you end up calling good evil or evil good. Um, in this way, like, so you'll go, well, maybe there's a lesson. Now we've just made, oh, and who's the teacher anyway? And I don't, if God's the teacher, then he's a bastard,
Yeah,
he, like,
exactly.
what do you tell that to someone who's been raped,
Yeah.
Or you end up calling good evil. In other words, you say, well, God's in control. Oh, so he's the one and this is what Kelvin and Zwingli and some of these guys would say, that God
Oh,
governs every evil. In fact, he commands it,
yeah.
Now you've made evil. So she said, instead of that,
It's like a parent whose kid doesn't clean the room up, so he gives them cancer.
yeah.
I'm
And
going to teach you.
I'll hear this all the time. Charismatic, or, oh yeah, the Lord took that guy out, or the
Yeah.
Lord gave my son cancer.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's an
Like,
evil
what
God.
the hell?
So she said, if you try to rationalize evil, you'll call evil good, or evil or good evil. And
Right.
she said, instead, understand this, that the goodness of God and the affliction of humanity are, there's an infinite distance between them, and they're a real contradiction. You don't have to try to harmonize them. Instead, she said, that they act, the goodness of God and the affliction of humanity, they act like a pincher that grabs you and arrests you and throws you down. And when it throws you down, you could be like Nietzsche looking down into the abyss and going mad, or you could be like Simone Weil and going down into the abyss and looking up, and there's the cross. And then she says, so the goodness of God, the affliction of man, there's an infinite distance, but the cross spans the distance, because when you look at the cross, you are seeing the goodness of God to the infinite degree. And you're seeing the affliction of humanity, all being borne by that one same person. And the two are in the same one hanging there. And then from his wounds can flow healing into your wounds. But also then she'll say, and your affliction, the worst things you've been through, the things you want to die for, that's like a nail that hammers your life into the very heart of the one on the cross. Your union with him is at its virtually its deepest level as he co-suffers
Mm.
your affliction with you. That kind of stuff, as an explanation, it's just another theodicy, and I don't find that satisfying. But for me, as an experience, I
Mm.
experienced what she was talking about. And so instead of being despairing, she had this little phrase that blew my mind. She said, be astonished. Be astonished by the horrors of affliction. Be astonished by the goodness of God. Be astonished that they intersect in the crucified one.
Mm.
And that your affliction unites him to you, to his. And weirdly, that's where healing comes to you and then through you. So like in your case, uh, there's healing coming through your wounds, through your experience. I mean, that's why you do the podcast.
Yeah.
It's your woundedness, instead of being the end of your life, ends up becoming a spring for the life of Christ. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love it. It reminds me of the crucified God,
Yeah.
Jürgen Moltmann, and his that. I love the fact that you jumped out of these seven sleepers and went into the black theology with James
Mhm.
Cone. I just interviewed a few months ago Adam Clark, who did his PhD with James Cone and now
Oh, wow.
teaches black theology at Xavier University. You should connect with him,
I'd
Adam.
love to.
But Adam Clark. But yeah, yeah. Her dive into that your chapter on black theology.
Sure.
Because that's a good segue. Her thoughts there into Black theology.
Yeah.
To me, is the miracle of American Christianity is the Black church.
It's really true.
I mean, think about enslaved people
Yeah.
by white people who are using the Bible to justify their enslavement, and then these black slaves hold on to Jesus and a gospel with probably deeper understanding than
Oh
any
yeah.
of the white people that enslaved them
That's right.
to this day. To this
They
day,
met Jesus of Nazareth,
that's
in ways that their slavers had never met him.
never.
You could say, if you want to go to the extreme, you could say that they that the black community has a direct connection to Jesus of Nazareth, where they're oppressors, and we still see white nationalism today. Um, I don't know what it is, but it's, a European heritage that hadn't met Jesus yet.
Right.
Like I would say it that strongly in some cases. So
I'd say the
what happened?
opposite of Jesus.
It's the opposite of Jesus.
Jesus.
So what happened was, after I thought of the seven sleepers, I'm like, well, like, is there anyone, never mind the sleepers, who can we listen to? Or has Christianity failed as an experiment altogether? And if it hasn't, whose voice can I listen to and trust? And so um, there was another chapter I did on some of the martyrs.
Yeah.
I trust their voices, but when I looked at the Black church, I had a interesting conference. The first time I met Lisa Sharon Harper, she's now an adjunct faculty for us as well. Incredible Black influencer, and she said this at the conference. She said, in connection with deconstruction, she said, if you are leaving the church because of its white nationalism without investigating the voice of the Black church, then your leaving is still an act of white supremacy, is what she said. So,
Hmm.
in other words, I don't want to be in the church because they're a bunch of white supremacists. Oh, so you've not heard the Black church? Well, no. It's like, then you're still a white supremacist because you've given it would blew my mind, and or sort of my hair stood up, what was left of it. And so then I started, I'm like, I don't know. I can't study it all, but who do I go to? And so I have this wonderful friend, Felicia Merle, and she's written a great book called Murrell, Felicia Merle. And so she introduced me really to James Cone and to Howard Thurman. And she
Yeah.
goes, and so she became my mentor. And I said that this matters so much to me. Their voices matter so much to me that I dare not use up, like, you can try to be an ally and think you're doing people a favor and just take up bandwidth talking for people out of your ass. So I went to her and I said, I want to write this chapter. I want you to help me understand them. But I want it to be so on that you could co-sign the chapter. And we got it there. So really, her and I co-wrote that chapter because I didn't want to be a,
Yeah.
straight white mansplainer for the
Yeah.
Black church, but I wanted to say, here's some people I trust and I'm willing to sit at their feet, and I want to platform them so you can hear them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the connection between the cross and the lynching tree that Cone identifies, it's just
Yeah.
a mind blower.
I know. It's so powerful. Oh my God. Yeah, I was pastoring this white evangelical vineyard church up in the Northland. We had some diversity, some blacks and Asians and Latinos, but we had a article come out 25 years ago in the Kansas City Star about the zip code in Kansas City that had the most men on death row in the state of Missouri, and it was 20 minutes from my house. And
Wow.
I was like this is our city, and so that's when I really started connecting deeply with the Black church in Kansas City and developed partnerships that are still friendships to this day, 25 years. And it was an education, man. Like I started getting into the black church and black theology and reading all this and listening. I started doing MLK events with my
Yep.
black pastor friends, and
Oh, good.
yeah, so that's a deep thing in me to this day. Um, I love that you brought that out and platformed that. That's so good. We're about out of time, but you kind of you wrapped up with some of this idea of liminal space,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I loved that. Talk, give us, in these last few minutes, what tell me what that is how to, because you're never the same again
Yeah.
after you go through these things. I think your belief systems are never the same again, but hopefully, all I can say is I hope. I came to the conclusion, like, even if there's not a God, I still believe in love. I still believe in creativity. I still believe in generosity. I still believe in certain foundational values. So I'm just going to press into those things, even if there's not a God. That's still what I want to live for. I was kind of
Yeah.
like, in that less certain, more open was kind of a phrase that I grabbed onto. I don't know if I got that from somebody or I made it up myself, but that's how I felt. So, but that kind of described for me I kind of tied into that liminal space idea a little bit, with those
Yeah.
phrases.
I probably learned that language from Richard Rohr.
Okay.
And what I've gleaned from some of his work is, liminal literally has to do with uh, a doorway. And so liminal space is talking about the space between, as you're passing through a doorway, or maybe in some cases it's a long, long hallway. So it's not, and so when we're in a space between where I was this and I was doing this, and I'm not going to be there anymore. Well, where is this doorway going? Um, you can get stuck there in this in between space, but I've come to regard it as um, it's an opportunity for a fresh start, you know. So um, usually a liminal space um, is uh, is involuntary. It's like, but it can be positive. It could be your first day of school. It can be your graduation day. It can be your first job. It can be your first kiss. But also, like as you move along, it's like first time you're fired, got to find a new job. First time you lose a loved one, going through grief. Maybe you're retiring or forced into retirement. That's a liminal space. Or maybe you lose a spouse through divorce, or also like through grieving their death and so there's all these really powerful moments in our lives where we're passing through a doorway from one place to another. And it's in the passing through that we may really experience God as absence, or
Mm,
we may experience God as presence.
mm,
And I don't think we can do much about that.
mm,
So, um, but so one of the things I wanted to say in the book is we're all going to go through liminal space multiple times in our lives. Deconstruction, we're in liminal space as a corporate, as a church. You are as a nation. Um, where we do have agency, though, is in our orientation towards God in that time, and or our approach to God. And so I think that's I try to help people in there, like when you're in liminal space, maybe here's a posture you could take, or um, so I could draw closer to God, both by negating what God is not and removing obstacles in our minds or lives that impede our pathway. What's blocking me from moving forward? Um, or I can get just take a more active approach and start volunteering for stuff, or caregiving, or peacemaking, or being an advocate for justice. And or I could take a creative approach. I could start engage in arts and culture, and you'll see a lot of liminal space people become super creative, especially, like think of the depressed artist, for example. Sometimes they're nervous about leaving liminal space because they touched on something important. But anyway, I think to encourage people who are listening, whatever liminal space you find yourself in, you might regard it as feeling lost and disoriented, but I think it may be an opportunity for a new way of being. One example was this: COVID. So in Canada, we were locked down for a while, and my wife and I discovered there was things we couldn't do anymore, and there was things that we had to do that we hadn't done before. But then when COVID kind of lifted, we asked these two questions. What are the things we stopped doing temporarily that we should just never do again anyway? And what are the things we did that we began to do as routines and patterns during lockdown that, wow, this should become a permanent part of our life? And I think that's a kind of liminal space activity, is about what can be left behind and what needs to be picked up, and what can become a new way of living.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, we're about out of time, Bradley. So thank you so much for doing this. Gosh, you've got a website, Jersak.com. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah. And people may want to check out our if they want to study with me.
Yeah.
SSU, as in St. Stephen's University, SSU.ca, not .com. So CA is for Canada because we're based in Canada.
Okay.
And we've got 1-year certificates if people want to dabble and get a certification. Or we have a bunch of students this summer doing summer courses just as a one-off. People can even, Brian Zahn did a 10 session thing on the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky that people can do as a correspondence course, and that for credit. So check that out.
Very cool. I haven't read it or listened to it yet, but the fiction book that you did with Paul Young, on the pastor.
You might like it. It's only on Audible now, or audio book. So
what's the title of that?
The Pastor, and the subtitle is A Crisis.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounded like one I want to read. It might be too close to home, but anyway. No.
Oh, it'll be really close to home. Yeah, but I think there's healing available in it. Yeah.
That's one that it's on my list now. So anyway, well, thank you so much, Bradley. Appreciate your heart, and thank you for infusing love in all aspects of your theology and philosophy and life and living. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to Spirituality Adventures. We'll see you next time. Hey, you made it to the end. Thanks for listening all the way through on this episode. By the way, if you're not already a supporter, go to spiritualityadventures.com, sign up for one of our monthly supports, and you will receive our bonus content. You'll receive lots of interesting information about our guests. Many of our musicians will do special bonus songs and record a song. So I want to encourage you to do that. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Be sure and subscribe. Be sure and share any of the episodes that you like. And be sure and make comments if you like them as well. This helps us get Spirituality Adventures out there to more listeners, more watchers. So whatever platform you're using, subscribe, like, share, make comments, and go to our website, sign up for our team, and be a part of the team support. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.